Welcome to the Athletic Performance Podcast, conversation for all things performance related. I'm your host, Ryan Patrick, and today we're going to do a deep dive on everything speed, power, and strength. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Hey, what's up, fam? It's Coach Ryan Patrick. It is so good to be back with a new episode of the Athletic Performance Podcast. I've been on hiatus for about 4 weeks. I've had a vacation in there. That's been a long-term trip that we planned for my wife. And then I've been launching my new program called the Total Coach OS Mentorship, which is really built around helping coaches get a systematic way to efficiently, effectively, and easily coach and improve speed for their athletes. And so there's been a lot of buzz in the background. There's been a lot of new challenges with that, but I'm excited to be here today because my guest, Zac Cupples, is an absolute titan in the industry, especially when it comes to the world of biomechanics. He is a guy that I have looked up to for years and years. I went to his Human Matrix course well before COVID, and I'm still following Zac years later, and he's still continuing to improve. And one of the things I wanted to bring Zac on today for was to talk about how he can use his coaching eye and his movement assessments to really see how some of these aberrations might actually impact high intensity actions like sprinting and change of direction. And so this is probably not something you have heard Zac talk a lot about, but if you don't know his history, Zac used to be in the NBA working with guys at a very high level, and so he's got great insight into this, and I think you guys are really going to enjoy this episode. So if you don't follow Zac, you absolutely have to, and if you haven't been to his Human Matrix, I can't recommend it enough, but I don't want to delay this podcast anymore. I think Zac's got a ton of information, and if you are a sports performance coach who is really wondering how to kind of meld this gap, this seemingly huge gap between, what we might see in a movement screen and what an athlete is actually able to produce out on the field or even in a test, I think this episode is definitely going to clear up a lot of things for you. So I hope you guys enjoy it. It's great to be back. And if you get anything out of this episode, please like, share, comment, rate this. 5 stars only. If it's not 5 stars, email me at athleticperformancepod@gmail and tell me what's up so that I can make it better. I really just want to get great coaches in front of you guys so you can get some great information and really just improve what you're doing. And if you're interested in more, you can definitely check out my Total Coach OS Mentorship. I'd love to have you inside of that and really help you improve your speed game. So without further ado, fam, here is Zac Cupples. Oh, here for sure. Like I could grow a mean goatee, like a Fu Manchu for sure.
Yeah.
Pretty quick. But the cheeks, man, they're just a little thin. It's emasculating.
Well, it's like maybe for your course, you grow the Fu Manchu and then you're up high and you're watching people do speed work and no.
Yeah.
It's like
one of those kung fu movies where my mouth is off with the actual audio.
Yes. I think
that would be something. I feel like you're the guy who would know how to help me do that too, because the videos you put out are so amazing. I always watch them. I'm like, man, Zac's so good at this stuff.
It's just, I have a good team who can carry out the stupid stuff that I want in some videos. Yeah. Like I always appreciate this last video I did. I did a landing. I was gonna say just your humor. Yeah, like a ninja, and then I had me turn into a ninja.
That's awesome. I haven't watched that yet, but I always laugh. I'm like, man, Zac's always throwing his little like quirks in there, just probably for his own like satisfaction, just to keep it lighthearted. But I appreciate it, man. I find your humor quite entertaining. So, well, let's actually like talk about something meaningful here. Let's do a podcast on some actual content.
Perfect.
But for anybody who doesn't know you, man, can you give me a quick introduction to who you are, what you're about, what you're doing now? Just bring us up to speed. Whatever depth you want to take this.
Sure. Well, my name is Zac Cupples. I'm a physical therapist and strength coach. I work out of Las Vegas, Nevada, out of my own company. And that's part of what I do. And the other part of that involves teaching in-person seminars. My seminars, Human Matrix, which I do all across the world. And it's a biomechanics seminar where we basically do 2 things. We give people more motion, and we teach you how to use that motion under load, so you can both stay healthy for as long as possible and maximize all the fitness qualities that you want to develop while minimizing trade-offs. And it's about really creating an all-encompassing approach in that regard, to ideally get there in the fastest amount of time possible. And I try to also teach a coaching style that I think applies to not just rehab exercises or even in the gym, but through movement in general. And then when I'm not doing that, I am working with people remotely through either training, sometimes movement sessions where we're dialing in a bit more on just the mobility side of things, work on mentoring as well for movement professionals of all kinds. And then I'm just producing a lot of content so I can educate as many people as possible on the wonderful things I do movement-wise.
Awesome. Well, I told you off air, I have a healthy appreciation for the length of time that the human matrix has been running, the amount of times that you've had this course and updated it is, I can't even imagine, because I think I came before COVID when I actually did the human matrix. So
it was when we didn't have the projector.
Yes.
We had to buy a projector.
There were some hiccups, but still a great event. I took a lot from it. I even pull out the manual that I have from back then from time to time because, one of the areas that I really love and appreciate about you, man, is that you can take some very complex topics and make it very simple and digestible. And I think especially with some of the newer perspectives on movement, a lot of guys, especially in the strength and conditioning world, get little pieces of this, or they watch somebody's Instagram, and we don't have the entire picture of what we're trying to accomplish. And we end up very, very confused. And at the end of the day, we need some simple applications of this information. And so I guess as a starting point, how do you think about this information when you're presenting it, especially to guys who are not clinicians like me? Like where are we going wrong in terms of what we're seeing that's out there, and what's just kind of shape this for me so we can get an understanding of how you approach some of these complex topics?
I think the biggest mistake that we make with material like this, or just anything, is we spend less time deciding and mastering what the fundamentals are or the basics, and we get to the really fancy stuff way too fast. And that's from a learning standpoint, but also from trying to implement this with our patients and clients. If there's any time that I fail with someone, and I still fail to this day, it's because I've skipped too many steps. And a lot of times doubling down on those fundamentals is the key piece. I'll get people who've either tried this stuff on their own, or or similar stuff, or they've worked with someone who's done similar things. And on the low intensity side, they're still inhaling really loud and full, and it's like, well, why are we not maximizing this still? And so if there's anything that I do when it comes to teaching or understanding this, it's I want to make sure people spend way more time on hitting some of the fundamental pieces and foundational concepts, whether it's executing with people or learning, because if you don't have that, when you get to the fancy stuff, you're going to fail. And I think we get to the point too where it gets too complicated for people on many levels. I think the concept of graded exposure applies not just to implementing this stuff, but also intaking this stuff from a learning standpoint. If someone has never been to the gym, you're probably not going to do day one 1 rep max back squat. Like, I hope not, because people just aren't. They don't have the skill of knowing how to back squat, and they probably don't have the ability to tolerate that amount of load. I think we got to apply the same thing when it comes to not just teaching people low intensity activities to try to create motion, but also understanding this material. And so when I'm teaching people, I am intentionally withholding a lot of information, or I'm trying to meet them where they're at. And I might take a concept, say external and internal rotation, and I might talk about it in a way that I know that they understand. But long game, I want them to be able to understand it in a different way. But if I lead with that, I'm going to lose them because they're going to be confused. It's just like learning a language. If we're going to speak Spanish or something, I'm not going to start with the most complicated part of that. It shows how much Spanish I can speak. And so I think that's the missing piece. And even is true with content. You can't, especially on short form, you can't have any nuance whatsoever. And so with that, you have to hit people with where they're at. Like, one thing that I've changed in my content is I don't talk about the sacrum. And I think it's super important. But it's going to confuse people. People can't, the masses, I want to say, can't appreciate that there's a little bit of movement there and changes within pelvic floor muscle activity and gut dynamics and all that stuff. It's super important, but they're not there yet. And that's okay. Even with long form content, I kind of mix and match, going to try to hit content that's built more for people who are, dealing with movement issues or pain or what have you, versus clinical or coaches. And even with that, it's like I try not to get into the weeds, because you have to have a foundation to understand the weeds. But if I can at least get you a little bit closer to where I'm at, then I think, as whether it's taking my free course or working with me, or not even just with me, or taking a seminar of someone else, you'll get that much more out of it. And I think that's the underappreciated thing.
I agree with you. I can count a number of times where I've been under the tutelage or mentorship of somebody that I just have tremendous respect for in the industry. And when I've gone to see them coach in person, this is going to sound like I'm being critical or I don't want it to sound disrespectful, but I've been a little bit underwhelmed by what they're doing. And it reminds me of the old, like, Bruce Lee quote, right? In the beginning, a punch is a punch, a kick is a kick. Then you learn all these variants, flying kick, high kick, low kick, roundhouse, whatever it is. And then when you're a master, it's like a punch is a punch, is a kick is a kick. And I think hearing you discuss this in that way, it's trying, in the beginning, I would say, when you're, let's just call it a white belt, it's simple in a very simplistic way. And then you get to this middle zone where I feel like it's the confused complexity. And there's a lot of things, and we're trying to really orient ourselves. And then when you become like a black belt, it's simple again, but it's like elegant and distinguished, right? It's simple in a very profound way. And so when I hear you discuss this, that's just, I kind of get back to the spot because, I get interest in something and then I dive deep and then I'm like, wow, like there's, like, I don't even know how to diffuse this bomb. Like, what do I need to cut here? But you do such a seamless job with that.
Well, I think you have to, because even if you've coached a squat for the 10,000th time, that doesn't mean that your patient and client's going to be able to tolerate something that's more than that, or be able to perform it well. And so I think, and maybe it's, we get a little bored, or we have some people who we do want to help who maybe have a lot of other things going on, and we think more information is the best way to do that, or more advanced things is the best way to do that. But you have to meet people where they're at, and movement competency in general is on the low side. And so I think it's a good sign if you do get a little bored with what you're doing, because it's like, oh, seen that again. Here we go. We're doing it again. But I'll tell you what, in a lot of other domains, you want that. Like, we were talking a little bit off air. I'm getting prepped for jaw surgery. I want my surgeon to be bored with his job because he's done it so many times that it's, this is routine. And I think we need to appreciate that if you've gotten to that point, like that's actually a good thing. And maybe you have to find other outlets where you can, not be bored. But I think with your job, it's one that you don't want.
I had this conversation with a number of people and usually present it like this. I think training is really simple. It's not that complex. We can make it complex. I think there can be some complex cases for sure. But on average, like I want people to squat well. I want them to split squat well. And I think sometimes as coaches, because there are a lot of smart people in this field, and we don't always use our intellect to its fullest capacity to do what we're doing. I feel like we go into these rabbit holes of exercise physiology nuance or biomechanical nuance as a way to just kind of stay intellectually stimulated. And what we end up with is becoming worse practitioners because we're trying to use all this for our own sake. But really, majority of the people I work with, like, it might be their first split squat this week, but I've already seen 10,000, and I am bored.
That's good. It means you're good at what you do.
Yeah. Right. Well, I want to throw you a couple layups here and maybe just unpack some specific stuff that people can use. So I love sprinting. I love watching people go fast, but I'm always cognizant of the relationship of, what I need their pelvis to do when their hips are in a split position. So it could be a split squat, one leg in front of the body, one leg trying to go into extension behind the body. Some of the things I see, especially from the frontal plane view, are a lot of lateral trunk flexion, varying degrees of hip hiking. And so maybe I'd like to reverse engineer this. So before an athlete is putting speed and power and load into this movement pattern, fundamentally, what do we need at the pelvis and some of the other joints to be able to get an authentic hip flexion and hip extension on the opposite side so that they're moving well?
So in the context of sprinting and anything, it's a series of rotations through the body. And so to flex one hip maximally and to extend the other hip, the spine has to be able to turn. It has to turn towards the flex side. And then it turns the other way. And if you can't do that, then you start to see some of those compensations. And I'll give you an example at slow speed, because you had mentioned kind of the hip hike and the side bending through the trunk. Well, we see that in walking too. You ever see someone who has that waddling gait, and their feet are splayed out? Well, that's someone who can't turn, who can't rotate through their trunk. And so in order to move forward, yeah, absolutely. And in that case, it's intentional, because that's useful because it makes me stable. If I have a wider base of support, so I can lift heavy things. Or in the case of, someone who's Gen Pop, you got someone who either has a lot of osteoarthritis or they're overweight, obese. They need to be stable as well, because otherwise they could fall. And so you can see that too when it comes to higher intensity. If someone can't manage the internal forces, so their ability to control themselves, the things moving within them, so whether that's the viscera, the tissues within their body, air, all this stuff, they might have to do a similar strategy. They might have to not intentionally, but reflexively restrict the amount of motion that's available within their body so they don't fall as they're moving fast. And so that's where you could see some of these side-to-side actions. Another thing could be if they don't have specific motions, they might have to lock a bunch of areas together to express a given motion. So in the context of some of the lateral movements that you're talking about, I always ask when I see something that we deem, not good, why would that be useful? So in the case of a lateral tilt of the pelvis, what that really is it's an anterior tilt. of the pelvis. It's just on one side. That's why it hikes up. Well, what does an anterior tilt get me? Well, I can anteriorly tilt the pelvis because it allows me to better put force into the ground. That force is internal rotation. And so it's a way of getting internal rotation on one side. And so when might I see that? Well, it could be you could look at it really two ways. It could be because I need to slow the rate of the leg floating in air. That might be what happens when I get up to flexion at 90, 100 degrees. But then on the down leg, it also allows me to get that last bit of external rotation that I need at extension beyond zero, because that's also happening on the opposite side. Same thing with the trunk, because you see the same rotations happening with the thorax. And so that's all that it is. And so how do we fix that? Well, we need to assess our individuals that we're working with to make sure that they have that range of motion, access it to just at a fundamental level. And then ideally you would do some things to help them gain that motion, but then you also want them to be able to demonstrate that motion at progressively higher intensities.
Mm-hmm.
And the analogy that I give is I can get someone range of motion on a table, and that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to use it when they sprint. Like I can't buy you a Ferrari, but you can buy a Ferrari, but if you can't drive stick, that doesn't mean you're going to be able to use it. And so we want to make sure that we're getting them to express these motions at higher intensities. And that's where having that consistent framework coaching wise is important. A reach on a low level breathing exercise to gain rotation in the thorax, I want to be able to have them do that same reach or a similar reach when it comes to sprinting, and that's front side mechanics. So it's the building that consistency throughout, but it comes back to what we were talking about earlier. You have to meet someone where they're at.
Absolutely. When I bring a lot of athletes into my facility, I always say, I want to watch you do a split squat. I want to look at your hip flexion. I want to do these things so that I can see what capacity you have available to you in a situation that requires no speed, no load, and no specific output, no fatigue, right? No speed, no load, no fatigue. And then we're going to do a variety of other tests. We're going to look at, a more dynamic split squat where you're up. We're going to look at a skip, a march, a run. So I can see as we start to magnify the outputs, how do these movement limitations that we're getting on a table start to manifest? And so one question that I want to tag on to this conversation is that I'm not going to stop sprinting my athletes. This is a physical requirement for them. So let's say in the scenario of I've got an athlete who maybe has some, aberrant movement or something that falls out of a bandwidth that I would deem as acceptable. They still have to continue to do these high force, high output types of activities. But we also need to kind of go to work repairing some of the baseline fundamental movement competencies. What is your suggestion or how would you approach this for an athlete who still has to balance these two things, knowing that the high intensity stuff can potentially kind of cement these, less than ideal movement patterns?
I think it's still classical periodization in the sense that you have to look at what a person needs to go from the level that they're at right now to the next level, and then just designing a comprehensive program accordingly. And so, in that context, if we deem that I think when it comes to sprinting, we have to look at right now with where I'm at, what is the biggest bottleneck that's limiting me to go to the next level. And so you would ideally design a program where you're trying to hit, if we're deciding that movement limitations are a big factor to that, where can I insert within the program things that are going to allow me to bring that up while I'm still either maintaining or maybe even gaining speed. And so when I'm working with someone and we're more on that side of things, because I do work with people who sprint as well, or I sprint myself.
You're a runner.
A lot of the non-sprint work is focused more on that. And that could be in the in the warm up or drills outside of training in general. That's focused on gaining motion where I don't have it, or demonstrating the positions that I need that I can't produce at a high intensity. And then maybe a slight step below that in terms of complexity is a lot of my weightlifting. You don't need a lot of force production at slow speed to sprint really fast. You need some, but maybe I can condense the amount of that I'm doing. And a lot of my other weightlifting based activities are more, I don't want to say positional in nature, but they're working on something like a split squat. But maybe I'm doing certain things with how I'm holding the weight, or I'm constraining it in a way so I can drive some of those rotational adaptations at an intensity that's above warm-up level. And that's basically how I design the program in that sense.
No, I think that's really valuable. And you hit on exactly what I wanted you to, so good job. No, but it's
I had a good
because
assist
of
from you.
some of these, I don't want to sound critical, hyper intellectual coaches will be like, oh, it's not perfect. We can't do this thing. We've got to fix this first and make it absolutely perfect. And then you can sprint. And that's just not reality. Unless somebody's recovering from an acute injury or they have some chronic pain that truly limits their ability to do this activity, they still have to train. My athletes are going to go out and sprint and cut and do all the things. And if I don't physically prepare them for that, I'm doing them a disservice. But I have to understand inside of that, there are some foundational things that I want to clean up. So it's like, how do we marry these two things and move forward together in a very meaningful way where they're getting exposure to the forces and velocities that they're going to be exposed to in a game-like situation. But we're also mindful of cleaning up some of these things. So again, you said bottleneck. And to me, I'm always looking for like, okay, I can't fix everything right now, but like, what's the highest leverage point for an athlete? And so with that in mind, when we're talking about somebody with maybe this inefficiency to create a split hip position authentically, what are some of the high leverage points or some of the tasks that you're really looking to clear up in terms of like maybe a hierarchy, or what come to mind as the biggest priorities for you?
When it comes to movement, a lot of the things that I look at, and I'm a physical therapist, but even working with people remotely, I use a lot of either passive or active tests to look at it's not isolated, but isolated joint range of motion. So do they have the ability to express a given motion at this super low intensity? And that's the very first level that I make a lot of movement decisions for my patients and clients. And then after that, it's more dynamic stuff. So it could be a split squat, could be a squat, could be a single leg squat, could be a step up. So adding a little bit more speed, a little bit more complexity, but still at a lower level. And I can make a lot of decisions just based off of those. But then the next level is like you can use the technical aspects of sprinting or other things higher intensity to also see what this person needs. I mean, that's why we film a lot of stuff at high speed and we slow it down. It's like, oh, you still don't have that. And then it's a matter of determining why that is. I think one thing in this context, if we go back to bottlenecks, that we don't think about is maybe there is some sort of physiological quality that we don't have that could be the reason why they have to go to this strategy. Like maybe their RFD is low. Maybe they can only, jump so far on one leg, but then the other leg is off. And so we need to do things in that capacity. And I think those are things that we probably don't spend enough time looking at that are just as relevant when it comes to determining why someone can't do a given movement. But I think we also just undervalue seeing a lot of the fundamental things that you talked about, like, do these things look good? And I don't know if there's a way we can objectify that, but I think, you and I, Ryan, can say, oh, that is a good split squat. Oh, I don't like how that looks.
Mm-hmm.
And there's obviously the motor component, but then there's also the sensory component. And I rely a lot on that more so than specific tests when it comes to beyond table.
Yeah, the split squat is one of my go-tos. I mean, you get the flexion, the extension. I feel like it tells me a lot with a little. Um, and I don't need any equipment to do it. Like I've got my coaching arm, and the athlete can feel it. If they're faking a stacked position, that back thigh is screaming because that rec fem is like getting pulled to no end. So it's even when they try to cheat it, I feel like there are outlets that are going to expose them. But one thing you highlighted that I don't think enough people talk about, you said maybe it's a lack of RFD or maybe just overall force producing capabilities. You don't hear too many times, and this will go back to you talking about like an anterior orientation of the pelvis, but I don't hear enough guys talk about when we think about movement related issues. We know, to your point early on, like if I try to squat somebody max on day one, we know what magnitude related errors in a squat look like. The trunk's rounding over, the knees are collapsing in. It's possible that if somebody lacks the physical prerequisites to sprint effectively, that they may have some of these magnitude related movement aberrations. And it's not an issue of maybe pelvic stability or anything like that. They just lack the physical underpinnings to do this without creating these compensations. So I don't really know if you want to add on to that, but it was just something that you said that I thought was really, really profound.
Yeah. Well, it's when you stress a system at any point in time and you go to the person's physiological limit, bad things will happen, right? And that's to anyone. If you put anyone at a 1 rep max of something, things will happen. I mean, I'm going to get a little weird out there, but even think about it like emotional stress.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you put a bunch of people and you put them in a war situation, like that's like, I can't think of anything that's more emotionally and physiologically stressful to someone. Like the system breaks. That's why
Mm-hmm.
we see things like PTSD among other stuff in that context, right? And the same thing applies when it comes to movement. And so you have to find compensatory behaviors to deal with those sorts of things. And that could be anterior tilt, that could be trunk flexion, that could be a lot of things. And so if you can build your buffer to tolerate those things, you may not see those at very high intensities for that person. So I think you have to look at it one of two ways. You can either push the ceiling up,
Mm-hmm.
and then when you jump, you're not hitting your head on the ceiling as much, which is what we're talking about when it comes to rate of force development or really just any fitness quality. Or you can raise the floor. And I think that's where gaining motion, trying to get access into certain positions, so on and so forth, is also useful. I have a lot of friends because I worked in the NBA for a while who are still in the NBA, and they with some of the stuff that they do, they don't spend as much time on some of the positional stuff that we do because they have access to their equipment. One of my buddies who's in the league, like one of his major KPIs for his guys is, being able to hit a certain amount of isokinetic force with knee extension. And it's like, we're not looking at that. But in his population, that is extremely relevant. And that's been shown as the biggest predictor to reducing several injuries for his specific group of people. Heck, none of us have access to isokinetic equipment. Although, now they're not a sponsor. I wish they would be, though. You can actually there's a thing called the Voltra where they do have isokinetic. It's like a cable system. That thing is like probably the best thing to come out in fitness in 10 years, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, we have a lot of people that go do the bio decks.
Yeah.
Especially after ACL return to play. And I'm like, I was like,
Yeah.
man, I just need to get one of these machines here because these kids do it every month at like 80 or $100 a pop. I'm like, man, I'm in the wrong business. You just come and use this
Seriously.
machine for 20 minutes. Like,
Yeah. The
but
problem is you got to
it's one,
buy like 10 machines. And so then you're spending, $300,000 on all this
yeah, I
because
need
the limitation with that is it's literally single joint stuff. But this Voltra by Beyond Power, um,
mm.
they have an isokinetic function within their cable system, and it's awesome. Yeah,
Oh, you know what? I think I know exactly what you're talking about. Is it almost
Beyond
like a
Power.
little box?
Yeah, box with an
Yeah, I
LED. They
yes.
just added isokinetic, but it had overloading eccentric, overloading concentric, so you could do overcoming
Mm.
stuff. Yeah, or accommodating resistance. Excuse me. It's yeah. I got
That's
one.
really
It's the best purchase I've made in a while.
okay. I might have to circle back on that because I remember seeing it come out and I thought, is it the real deal? But if it really does assess, because I mean, if I could, there's so much. We're kind of shifting gears here, but there's so much anticipation and fear and just nervousness on my athletes' part when they go to do this ISO-K stuff because this has become like the thing that is going to clear them. Which on one hand I get, like we need certain physical prerequisites, right? You're a guy in the NBA, like I need this simple KPI. But on the other hand, I'm like, this is so far removed from like sprinting and changing direction that like I don't know if it's enough. But if I had a way to test them to just kind of ease the jitters of like, the pre-test the just the value that it's bringing to whether or not they're getting cleared, like that would be amazing.
Yeah.
Can you
Well,
can you do
and I
any
think
extension on that?
I have. I've been actually
Hmm.
training myself with it. It's pretty cool. You gotta kind of rig it up funky. But basically, what it is like, take your cable column that you got at your gym, and could you do the extension on that? Well, yeah, you definitely could. It's just it's the same thing because it's literally a
Hmm.
cable system. But I think like if I ever were to open up a gym, I would get two of those, and I wouldn't get a cable system at this point.
Hmm.
It's nice. To your point
Interesting.
though, regarding isokinetics and like sprinting and all that, I think you have the technical aspect, and obviously you have this complex movement that I have to tie together and put a lot of moving parts together to do
Hmm.
well. I could have an issue in one of the moving parts. Like maybe I don't have the stuff within the musculature and connective tissues to do what I need to do in a given muscle. And maybe that is the bottleneck that I need to address to be able to do that. Or I do have it, but I don't have enough of it to do it healthy for an extended period of time. And so you really have to look at all of these factors to figure out what are the rate limiting steps to get the person from one level to the next. I mean, it's you could even extend that beyond the movement context. It's like maybe someone's doing everything right training, but they can't sleep. And so that's what you have to address in order to get them to the next level.
People don't
So
want these simple answers, Zach.
I know.
So
Well,
I'll
and
tell you a
it's
quick
like it
story.
is simple,
Good.
but it's also complicated. But I think it also goes back to like, are you really mastering all the fundamentals as well as you could? Like sleep, food, training, social. Like one of the
Hmm.
questions I ask people who I train is like, "Hey, how social were you this week?" Like if you haven't hung out with friends or you don't have a social circle, like sorry, that's gonna have an impact on your inflammatory markers. Like they've done studies where they look at inflammation and immune response in people who are social versus people who are asocial. And the more social you are, the greater your immune system is. But the more social you are, the greater your immune system is, and the less inflammation you have. And then vice
Hmm.
versa. If I'm asocial, I'm not around people, I actually have a reduction in my immune system, and I have an increase in my inflammation. And it actually, from a survival standpoint, makes a ton of sense why that would happen.
Hmm.
So think about this. Let's say in two cases you sprain your ankle. One, you're around people. The other, you're out in the woods by yourself. Well, And if I'm around people, people can take care of me. I don't need as much inflammation. But people carry germs. I could get sick. So I need a robust immune response. If I'm out in the wild, I need to heal as fast as possible. Otherwise, a bear or whatever is going to get me. And so I want inflammation to be higher because it's going to help the tissues repair faster so I can do what I want to do. But because I'm less likely to get sick, I don't need as robust of an immune response. But then if I, have that for a long, long time, that's problematic, right? Inflammation runs rampant, tissues get eaten, you get sick, all this jazz.
I'd hate to see my inflammation. I don't feel like I'm as social as I need to be.
Maybe that's your bottleneck, Ryan.
Might be. That's the key to breaking 20 or 21 miles an hour or whatever it is.
Might be.
Shoot, I was going to share a story with you. When you were talking about simple KPIs, I obviously love data. I got the force plates. We've got some other stuff we're using, and it's all very fun. Probably part of this intellectually stimulating approach to what we're doing, of course. But I had an NFL guy 2 summers ago, and my KPI for him was a single leg hop over a 6-inch hurdle, because he would have a very significant right side bend when landing on his right leg, and not the same case on his left side. And so we would use some retest stuff, and I'd be like, hop the hurdle, let's see how it looks. And when he was sprinting on our true form, you could see more of a crunching and a compression on that right side. And we could tell really quickly what stuff was working to help pop that side open and what wasn't. And you would think somebody at that level, well, we need like GPS data and, ground contact times on the right versus the left side. So we need to get some, contact grids and all these other things. And honestly, it was just through observation and like watching, like, hey, this is off. So I'm sure there's many cases like that where you're just like, simple stuff can really get at the root of what we're talking about in terms of movement proficiency.
Simple before complex. 100%. Yeah, I like that. Okay, random. Yeah, and I could be totally wrong. Was this guy either a wide receiver or in the back, like quarterback or safety?
Running back.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I was like, I hope you don't need to like cut off that right leg upfield, because you might get a little stuck. So, shoot, that reminds me. I ended up using View Motion on him. So it's an AI software. So we looked at his 10-yard sprint or 10 meters. Can't remember. We looked at a fly, but then they also have a 10:05. So you run 10, you cut back 5 yards, and his turnaround time and braking capabilities on that right leg were significantly longer than the left side. I mean, he's still faster than me off both sides, but there was a difference for him. So I just thought that was really interesting how some of the data actually supported what we were seeing in something as simple as like, hey, jump over this hurdle, which for him is like a effortless.
Well, and then it makes you really think like, did you need the 8? Maybe not until you cleared the hurdle test.
Yeah, that was mostly exploratory. We were just playing with it at the time. I'm like, hey, you're fast. Like, let me see how this looks compared to, a high school kid. And it just, after the fact, I kind of went back and dug into it a little bit more. And I'm like, that's really interesting, because if I had only had the AI, I don't know if I really would have understood what was going on as much. The hurdle test for me was more revealing, if that makes sense.
Did you see stuff at an even lower intensity where you were like, okay, I could see him having this be that bottleneck at a high intensity?
Oh, the right hip early IR, so knee at 90 degrees. I mean, it was a hard stop. There was maybe 5-10 degrees, I'm like, you feel that brick that brick in there?
Yeah.
And the left side, he definitely had a little bit more of that squishiness, where his whole pelvis would kind of turn as you twist his leg. But man, that right side, I remember it just being rigid.
Yeah. It makes sense. so then you need the side bend to basically break.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it makes sense why he would have longer ground contact on that. It's like he can't absorb force on that side. And so I'm going to just do a hard break as long as I can. And then, you know, it's just like a car. Think about hard braking on a road, and then you got to accelerate. Like, it takes a little bit of time to get up to 60, even if you got a fast car.
And you can drive a stick in a Ferrari.
Yes, which I'm sure he has.
Well, this has been awesome, Zach. I kind of want to start to wrap up because we've been going 45 minutes here. I feel like you've covered a lot. I know guys who are going to come to your Human Matrix are going to get more insight into some of the tests and the things that we've talked about. But I really want to put a neat, pretty bow on this and kind of recap some of the things that we've discussed that I think are really golden nuggets for people. And then I'll just kind of let you wrap it up, expanding on maybe some additional thoughts or next steps for some coaches. But number one, talking about the bottleneck, I thought that was huge because I think there is a reality where we have to address both sides of the performance spectrum with some low intensity movements to correct things that we see, as well as still maintain the physical, training to support the activities that higher level athletes are going to do. Or, even your weekend warriors who are running and doing marathons or competing in whatever. I do jujitsu. I'm terrible at it, but whatever you do. And then the other thing that I don't hear enough movement guys talk about, and I want to hammer home because this was awesome, but that, if you have a physical deficit, that can manifest as a movement compensation to try to cover the deficits that you're experiencing. And so, I would encourage you to frame this towards strength coaches because I can't put my hands on people and stuff, but what are the next steps? So if somebody's hearing these things, what do they really need to do to take the next steps to maybe dive a little bit deeper into this? And what are your overall thoughts on this?
Well, so the bottleneck thing, which really is, there's a book called The Goal. It's actually a business book. It's probably one of the best books I've read in the last probably 5 years. And in that, he talks about the theory of constraints. And so basically what that means in simplest terms is if I'm trying to get a certain output, there's going to be things, keystone things, bottlenecks that will preclude me from getting that output. And funny, the guy who recommended it to me, my friend Eric, he wanted me to read this from a training context, but actually, in my sense, it was most useful for me in a business context. It was like, oh, I need to address this, and this if I want my business to grow to the next level. But really, it's applicable to everything, applicable in relationships. In fact, in the book, he talks about the bottlenecks of his relationship with his wife in that case. It's applicable to personal life, like everything. And so what I think you have to think about as a professional is what is your bottleneck from where you're at now to where you want to be. And so if it's, oh man, with all my athletes that I work with, I am struggling with this. Well, then you want to devote all of your resources to figuring out how to solve that. Maybe it's rate of force development and you got to start learning things, or you need to buy equipment to help better with that. Maybe it's, wow, I can't gain access to range of motion, and I think that's the bottleneck that I need solved. Well, then maybe you need to consume information that helps you get better at that. Maybe it's Human Matrix. Shameless plug. But I mean, that's like what I think about when it comes to anything, learning, all that. Like in my case, I think my biggest bottleneck is probably things within the craniofacial region. So that's where I've spent a lot of my time learning, selfishly, but then also for patients and clients. And so I think you just have to apply that to your learning. And to me, that's been much more efficient at consuming content, because then you can apply it immediately. And then that application is where you're going to really solidify your learning. I think early in my career, and I don't regret doing this by any means, but I think I took a bazillion different courses because I didn't know anything. So it's like everything was a bottleneck. You have to address all this stuff. But I also think one limitation with that was you can only apply so much with a given patient, a given client, in a given context. And so you end up forgetting a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's much more efficient, and you learn better if you can stay really focused on a few things or the one thing, spend as much time trying to solve that specific problem, and then you move on to the next problem and you direct your learning that way.
That's amazing, man. I think distraction control is a huge issue for people and staying focused on one thing. I know it is for me, especially, as you learn new information, you become excited about it. And I know in the past, even if I try to stay focused on something, the algorithm of social media might toss me something that just can totally veer me off into another direction. But hugely powerful. And obviously, I want to reiterate what I said. I don't even know if I said it on air or off air, but your ability to make many complex things simple is so profound. I've learned so much from you. If you're listening to this and you haven't been to a human matrix, you absolutely have to go. So Zac, I want you to talk about, what you have coming up with the matrix. We're at the end of 2024 now. Are you scheduling 2025? Do we have stuff on the calendar?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I got, almost full 25 dates. I'm all over. I'm trying to think of all the places that I'm at. There's still a few dates left in 2024 if you're around. So let's see. I'm going to be in Houston next week, and then I got Colorado at the end of the month, and I got Vegas and San Diego in November. But yeah, I have pretty much, I don't have like my full schedule for 2025, but I have dates all the way through November next year. And I'm all over the US, and I'm also in Europe for one of them. So
Oh, that's exciting. Where are you going?
right now, Dusseldorf. I might have one more location, but I'm still working on that. So yeah, I've never been to Germany, so I'm excited to check it out.
How's that work? Do you have a translator go with you, or is everyone English speaking?
Germany, everyone's English speaking, but some of the international ones that I've done, like I'm going to China this winter. That
Oh,
one I
wow.
have to have a translator. Because it's funny. I've been to China so much this year. Because I went in beginning of the year. I did a few, and in the summer I did a couple, and then I'm doing more in the winter. Yeah, I think China has either the second or third largest English-speaking population,
Hmm.
but because China is so massive, it's still like 1 in 5 people speak English. So you got to have a translator there. And then when I was in Spain this summer as well, um, it's interesting. Spain, like there are a lot of people who speak English, but out of all the European countries, it's definitely one of the lower ones. So we had to translate that one. Um, but like I taught in Slovenia a couple years ago, and most people spoke English, so we didn't have to translate there. Germany, most people speak English. Yeah, so
Hmm.
it's interesting.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
So what's next for you, man?
In terms of life, well, I'm hiring, so if anyone wants to apply to do remote movement coaching with myself and help people, um, that's 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 happening right now. And I'm not looking for. I mean, obviously if you have the technical skill, that's great, but culture fit first and foremost. That's
Hmm.
that's my current bottleneck that I'm trying to solve.
That is the bottleneck because you can teach anybody the skills.
Hmm. Yeah, you can. It's the it's having the similar values
Hmm.
that you can't. I don't want to say that that's inherent, but just people value certain things, and so if you have that first and foremost, I mean, even soft skills to some extent, you can break that down into specific behaviors, and it's harder to teach,
Right.
but it's still teachable. But the values is one thing that you know harder. I don't know if you can teach that as a skill. And so I need that first and foremost. So yeah, other than that, it's that and trying to continue to help people as much as I can.
Cool. And where should people find out more about you?
ZacCupples.com is the hub. ZACCUPPLES.com. That's where you could get access to a lot of my other social media stuff. I'd say my biggest platforms on social, if you just search my name, are YouTube and Instagram. But I also do blogs. All of my services are there. If you want to get to Human Matrix, you can find it there.
I am still a subscriber to the Human Matrix playlist on Spotify.
Oh, nice. I need to update it. Although
I was going to say, that's what I was getting at.
You got to...
Because I always appreciate your taste in hip hop, man. It's good stuff.
Well, I think it's a testament to say there's not that much new good stuff that's really like tripping my trigger. Although... I was
going to say, I haven't seen updates in a while.
LL Cool J just came out with an album. I don't know if you heard that.
I haven't listened to it yet. I didn't know he was still doing stuff.
He hasn't. I think his last album was it probably was a decade ago, 2013, 2014.
Is that like Phenomenon?
It's actually pretty good. What's that? The Phenomenon?
Was that Phenomenon?
Yeah, which I heard wasn't good. I didn't even know. Like was it Exit 13, the one before that? Like that was his last one? It was okay.
Okay.
But this one, so get this, Frank. Gets Q-Tip from A Tribe Called Quest to produce the whole thing. And like if you don't like that sound, like my buddy Joe, he's like, I hated it. It sounded awful. But I'm like, you didn't like Tribe growing up, did you? He's like, no, that's your issue. But I mean, he's got some great features. Eminem's on it. Nas is on it. And like the very first hip hop album that I owned that I had to hide from my mom was LL Cool J, Mr. Smith.
Yeah.
And so it was a great album. God. And I think like it's like lyrically he's on point with it.
I'm gonna give it a listen. I'm already intrigued, and I need some new hip hop because I don't know, some of the stuff coming out is just not doing it for me.
No, even some of the stuff from people I like Eminem's new album, and this is almost sacrilege for me to say because he's probably. I always alternate between him and Nas, although Freddie Gibbs is slowly.
You're a big Freddie Gibbs fan, yeah.
He's so good. Funny story. But Eminem's new album I thought was funny story. I was in Cabo last year with my wife. That's when I proposed to her. But we were flying back, and we ended up getting stuck in Cabo. Worst places to get stuck. But Freddie Gibbs was at the airport, and I went to a store, and I would have said something to him, but he was on his phone. He was just like yelling at someone, but it was so funny. I'm like, oh my God, that's Freddie Gibbs. And I'm like, man, I should have asked him for a picture because I'm like, I just don't want to bother the guy. And someone did while he was on the phone, ask for a picture and got it. I'm like, damn.
Should have done it. Yeah, you probably don't look like the typical Freddie Gibbs fan. That is true.
Yeah.
All right, brother. Well, I appreciate your time. Just hang on here for a minute so this can finish uploading. But man, I'll definitely tag all your links in the show notes and send people your way. I appreciate your time today. Super great to chat and catch up, man. It just time goes by too fast. I don't get enough.
It does.
Face to face with all the beautiful people in the industry. So thanks again, man.
Yeah, of course, man. You ever make it out to Vegas?
I need to. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to rate and review us with 5 stars only. Then subscribe so you can get all the latest updates.